Treat Her Like a Lady by Daniel Thomas Moran. My entire life has had a soundtrack. I'm not sure how that happened, but I've associated many of the events of my life with songs I was listening to at the time they happened. Back when I was a kid, we listened to most of our music on a small transistor AM radio. We were not aware just how bad the sound of them was until years later when FM radio was introduced, and along with it, stereophonic sound through quality speakers. As I recall, that all started happening in the vicinity of 1970 when I was about 13 years old. But in the AM Top 40 radio days, the taste of the public was both fed and represented by a handful of songs played over and over again, all day and all night long, by disc jockeys, whose personalities became thoroughly interwoven with the music they played. In my day, growing up on Long Island, they had names like Murray the K, Dandy Dan Daniels, DJ Jack Spector, and Cousin Brucey. My recall of the Top 40 radio format was that the top 10 songs were played once an hour. In those innocent days, songs were generally less than, as they used to say, 259. If you were listening that radio all day at the beach or in your room at home, you might hear those songs played several times a day. They really got into your head, and as if that was not enough, if you were in possession of 39 cents, you could go down to the local record store and buy a copy so you could listen to that song over and over on your record player until your parents threatened to kill you or give you up for adoption. Those little 45 RPM records were often the most precious possession a kid might have. The first one I ever bought, I bought when I was the tender age of 7. I still have most of mine to this day, and I cannot imagine why. Now I have them all on my phone, along with more than 10,000 others. Many of those songs are part of the soundtrack of my life, but one of them recently brought me back to an exhaustingly long day in my life at age 14. Every time I hear that song, the movie of that day starts to play in my head, and it is as clear as it was when it happened. That song was Treat Her Like a Lady by the Cornelius Brothers and Sister Rose, and it was the summer of 1971. It only made it to number 3 on the top 40 charts that summer, but it made it into my head, and it has stayed there ever since. All that aside, it's a catchy and enduring tune. The previous summer I had become afflicted with an obsessive love for the game of golf. In those days, I made my living delivering newspapers in the neighborhood, something which involved rain and cold and inconvenience and barking dogs and cheapskates. To deliver 35 copies of the 5-cent Newsday to the neighbors 6 days a week earned me about $8, something which made me a very wealthy man. But when I made it to 14, I had another opportunity, and that was to become a caddy at Bethpage State Park, where there were 5 fine public golf courses. One of them, the Black Course, became the first public course to host the United States Open in 2002. It hosted it a second time in 2009. To become a caddy there, back in the day, one had to take caddy lessons, something which amounted to 5 harrowing hours with a man named Mr. Zaremba. He was the caddy master and also the source of terror among caddies. That seemed to be part of his scheme, and it worked. All these years later, I can recall but 2 things he said, and it involved cautionary tales for us eager young lads. One was to not climb the fences around the course for any reason, something he brought home by telling us of the caddy who had slipped and left his testicles hanging in the fence. This was an image which can impress a boy who has yet to even grasp why he needs testicles, but yet fully understands that he wants them right where they are. The other story involved lightning. Mr. Zaremba explained that the 14 clubs in a golf bag should be thought of as a well-gathered bunch of lightning rods. He told us of the caddy who, standing out in the fairway with a bag of clubs, was hit by a bolt he was not expecting, and blown right out of his sneakers, which were left smoking on the ground. Of course, Mr. Zarimba also told us some things about how to actually caddy, a necessary profession in the days that preceded the scourge of the powered golf cart. On my first day as caddy, I was feeling great and understandably determined. I also had a brand new 10-speed bicycle, a new kind of item in those days and one which could clearly take you anywhere and at high speed. The hitch was that I lived about 10 miles from Bethpage, and the ride, even pedaling hard, took a full hour through the streets of Massapequa to a bike path through a long stretch of woods. The courses opened at 5 a.m., and to get a loop, a guy with a bag of clubs interested in having them carried, as quickly as possible, it was necessary to get there early, and early was about 4 a.m. So I rode in the dark, leaving home at 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning, arriving at the Caddy house where I signed my name onto a list of guys with the same idea. That first day, my name was pretty far down on that list, and so along with a couple of dozen other hopefuls, I took a seat and waited for the sun to come up and the call to come in that I had a loop. In the Caddy house was a radio playing Top 40. The first song I recall hearing was a tune called Treat Her Like a Lady by the Cornelius Brothers and Sister Rose. All my friends had to ask me something they didn't understand. How I get all the women in the palms of my hand. I told them, treat her like a lady, do the best you can do. You gotta treat her like a lady, and she'll give in to you. Who knew that the whole romance thing was not that simple? I was 14. I did not know much about anything. By 10 o'clock that morning, I had heard the Cornelius brothers more than a number of times, and then finally the call came in that I was to report to the starter at the red course. I was assigned to a guy who had somehow managed to find the heaviest golf bag ever brought onto a first tee since the game was invented. I cannot say that it was exactly half my own weight, but it felt like it. I don't recall much about the round, but that my guy was serious as death itself, and there was a bet at stake. When he hit his ball into the woods on the 17th hole, I was unable to locate it. To his way of thinking, I had lost his ball, something reflected in the tip he gave me, $1, in addition to the $5 he had to pay me no matter what dumb things I did that day. To my mind, though it was now 3 in the afternoon, a full 12 hours after I had left home in the dark and headed for the golf course, I had made $6, something which took me 4 days to earn delivering Newsday. So I walked back to the bike rack at the Caddy house feeling pretty flush. I had a new job, a new 10-speed bike, and $6 cash. Then I found out that I no longer had a new 10-speed bike. The lock and chain were hanging there, cut cleanly through by some crook. I walked back to the clubhouse to tell someone what had happened when I ran into a New York State trooper, looking rather smart in his gray uniform and Smokey the Bear hat. He was very kind and filled out a report of the theft. I realize now, in the days of my comfortable senescence, that no one in history has ever recovered a stolen bike. Back then, I was hopeful, even if the trooper was probably performing a pointless exercise in a lost cause. But he offered to help me out by driving me home so I did not have to suffer a 3-hour walk, or worse, suffer the humiliation of having to call my parents to come fetch me. I enjoyed the ride in the cruiser and also the expression of my father when he opened the door to see me in the company of the New York State Police. Actually, the whole thing might have been worth it for the look on his face. That was my first and last day as a caddy, and also my last new bicycle. It was also the summer that I came to a new obsession: girls. Strange as it seems, you know you can't treat a woman mean. So, my friends, there you have it. I say it's the easy, simple way. If you fail to do this, don't blame her if she looks my way, 'cause I'm going to treat her like a lady so affectionately. I'm going to treat her like a lady, and she'll give in to me.